Laura, I didn't hit the live button. You ready to start over?
Yeah, I'll shorten my story too.
Good morning, everybody. We'll try this again since there is no countdown today. And, well, we all make mistakes, right? We're not professionals. I don't have a professional sound crew around here.
And we're going to talk about that too.
Yeah. So let's talk about benevolence today on the Flipside Stream Class Slide. Welcome, everybody. And as always, I have Laura, my host, co-host here today. And I can't wait to hear the story. So let's start off, though, about benevolence and why it's important. So Merriam-Webster looks at benevolence, and it's a disposition to do good. It's an act of kindness, and it's a generous gift. And I know you have more to add to that. So I want to give you that because I know benevolence is something you take on for your leadership.
Absolutely.
On your things. And so I'm going to let you kind of run with that and go with it.
Yeah. So my definition is like well-meaning intentions in addition to just being kind and good. I think a lot of people think of benevolence as almost the idea of giving gifts. Oh, they're so benevolent. They donated to the church or something. But benevolence to me is just having really well-meaning intentions. Everything you do is for the better of the organization or for the person you're doing it with or for. And in the end, when you really, really focus on doing your best and having those good intentions behind everything you say and do, then if you do make a mistake, it's not viewed as an intentional or it doesn't have any negativity behind that mistake. It is an honest and transparent mistake at that.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So I've got two stories I want to tell. And the first one we talk about Gene. And Gene was an employee of mine who at first was great. And then as time went on, I started to notice that he would take a lot of what other leaders were saying and twist their words or share them with the staff in not a negative or not a very positive light. And so he was creating kind of this rift between the leadership and the employees. And I then, as his direct supervisor, would often worry about what I'm saying and how he's going to twist those words.
Right.
And so his intentions, in my opinion, were not very well-meaning because he was trying to get whatever fodder he could to boost his case, whatever that may be. So I spent a ton of mental capacity and energy and stress preparing for a conversation with him and then also reflecting on my conversations with him to make sure I didn't say anything that could be used against me. At one point, this individual said, I'll share with you if you share with me, because he just wanted to get like inside intel. And I couldn't do that, because I didn't know what he was going to say to anybody else.
Plus your position you were in, right?
Yeah. So at any rate, to me, that was not a benevolent situation. What I would want as leader and what I do want as a leader, I want to be able to enter a space with either a group of employees, a team of employees, or just individual employees. And I want everybody to feel like they can say what they need to say, and it's not going to be construed as something negative. And if we do make a mistake, it'll be forgiven. And ultimately, that has bode very well for me in my subsequent job. So I was just the director, a very part-time director of this arts hub in Wapaka. And I said to the co-chairs, and people I work directly with, I had a very open conversation with them about the idea of benevolence. I'm like, this is my word. This is what I care about. I want this to be a benevolent relationship. Mm-hmm. And know that anytime I say anything, it always comes with positive intentions. Even if I'm using like sarcasm, I do that to make light of situations and have fun, not because even my sarcasm is never it's never at somebody else's expense, if you will. So because we had this very open and transparent conversation about benevolence, working for the hub was one of the most rewarding and non-toxic things I've ever had the experience of working for and with those individuals. And I really think that it's a great thing for leaders to do, is to have that explicit conversation around benevolence, because it will bode you well.
I think it's one thing. Let me.
Yeah.
So two things, right? When you were talking about Gene, I think it's important I think it's important, I guess, for everybody to kind of understand too that it, to me anyways, to Seaman, and I've heard the story offline just for everybody's case, so I know a little bit more into it, I think, for the insight. But um I think when you're seeing selfishness play out and really humbleness play out, and if if you're a leader and you're humble and you're servant, I think benevolence just falls into place, that most things that you do is good for you, right?
Yeah.
And or is for the betterment of the team, is what you're always trying to do. And that
Yeah.
doesn't always come, let's be very clear on the whole thing. That doesn't always come across like you say. You're like, I tried from the beginning, and I think that's a main point too to contend with, is that you got to, from the beginning, establish yourself as, this is how I am, this is who I am. There's still like, you're gonna still have to have buy-in, right? So your actions, you can't just say, this is how I'm going to act, and then or this is my intentions, and then without backing that up over time with, yes, this is building, because you're building trust, you're building loyalty, right? You're building respect from you're trying to gain those things from your people. In Gene's case, let me ask this question. Did you, so from a leadership standpoint, from a leadership problem standpoint, I should say, why didn't you just, so I guess when I look at that,
I did.
Okay. Well, I don't just mean take him head on and say, hey, not acceptable, unacceptable, right? Because I know you did that, right? And so for the listeners, I know you took Gene head on and said, this is why this is not healthy. But I guess the point being of saying, if you're always saying the right thing,
why let it bother me?
Right. Yeah. Because so it reminds me of a story of we used to get into, when I went to my leadership school, we talked about Facebook and we talked about social media and what do you do with all of your people about it. And Dale and I have talked about this on the Lions Guide too, about what do we do? What do you do if you see something on social media, or what do you do about stuff? And there was a very big, when social media was bigger, Facebook was bigger back then, let's say 10 years ago, you would look at it and you would say, dude, some people were like, I don't friend any of my people who are under me. And then I got to leadership school and I had a guy named Tuck Williams, great guy, down home barbecue cook in Tennessee dude, but would be friends with everybody, was the most level-headed dude you'd ever meet in your life, very benevolent in the way in his actions, cared about people, was in a very high position as a force. And he got in front of us and from that thing, he's like, I friend everybody. He's like, if they ask me to friend them, I friend everybody. He's like, I don't go out of my way to do it. Like, I don't go and find people and do it, because I do. And we were all like, oh my gosh, you can't, how do you? And he's like, one, I live my life that the things I post aren't what I want people to see. If anything, I want them to know this is how potentially in my eyes, I should be living my life. Right. Which is fine. But another thing is like, I'm carrying on normal conversations. He's like, I'm not going to get into, because there was things about fraternization and stuff, and for non-military folks, right? There's levels cannot talk to other levels type of a thing, and have personal relationships if you get into officers and enlisted, things like that. So it was interesting to me though, that this kind of rings the same of saying, he was like, I'm not going to say anything that's going to be that way anyway.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you were like, I really worried about what I had to say around him, versus just being like, he's going to hear he's definitely not going to hear stuff that I don't want to say, because I wouldn't say that in front of a subordinate anyway. Or B, saying, I don't, sure, go tell everybody exactly what I said. And if you twist it, cool, I'll get in front of everybody and you'll feel that wrath,
Yeah. And I think that was actually part of it, is there was some twisting happening. And also I do value being a leader of transparency. So it was always me trying to walk that fine line of what can I say, what can I say, and like making him still feel respected as an employee, that like I am telling him what I can tell him, without it being twisted. And so it was just really interesting. And even some of the things that I would hear him say, I'd be like, you're upset about that? Like it would surprise me.
Sure.
what they would glob onto. And so that's the other thing. Like, what if I say something that I think is totally benign, but they're going to glob onto as this, I can't believe she said this, or she's doing it this way, or she's letting this happen, or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and this was all during COVID. So there was a lot of mistrust, I guess, and a lot of, there was so much loss of control in everyday life that anything seemed like it was fear-driven or loss of control type of situation. And so it was hard.
That's a really good point to bring a lot of, to continue the circle that I think we were talking about. I was talking about the post-COVID world, and really benevolence and compassion has come up in the post-COVID world, where you could remember saying, look, we cared about people when they checked in at 9 a.m. and we cared about people until they checked out at 5, right? Just fictional things. But we didn't, the word isn't care, but it wasn't our problem as a business to worry about them, and they didn't worry about us. So everybody's kind of home life and political views and everything else at that point, I think before COVID, it wasn't necessarily, those didn't come to the surface. You kind of were like, maybe there was water cooler talk about stuff, or, maybe there was, scuttlebutt for my Navy word of the day, but really, like, it didn't happen. Where now you read article after article that's saying, like, employees care what their employers think about and what they represent, right? And you're seeing clashes all over the place of, that's not my ideology. And yet, I'll give a great example. The North Carolina Courage in the NWSL Soccer League has a staunch religious player that does not support the LGBTQ community. And so she's refusing to wear, when they have pride nights and pride things, she's refusing that. Now, that's a tough issue, right? Because it's not just, it's an for an employer standpoint, how do you, as a community, we support, right? We want to support all walks of life, right? But that's our players, and they have a respect also in that of saying, look, that's your view, that's fine. We live in America, you're allowed to. So that benevolence and that compassion all around, it's really getting tested, if you can imagine, across the world, and since 2020, right? And all the stuff that's happened to it. So I wanted to read something. I did a little research before this week for today, and I read a great Harvard Business Review article, and it talked about compassion. I'm just going to read 2 lines of it here. It said, compassion in leadership creates stronger connections between people. It improves collaboration, raises level of trust, and enhances loyalty. In addition, studies found that compassionate leaders are perceived as stronger and more confident. We have gone away from being, I think, a society that you have to have the tough girl, tough-minded personality to be in charge, right? I was talking to a leader that I mentor, and one of their issues was I don't want to look weak by doing something, right? And it was definitely how that leader was raised of being that way and stuff. And I had said to them, I said, listen, you being more human, if you will, like us, like the workers that he and she employed. I said, that actually looks like better, right? Like, you're looking better when you seem more compassionate, when you seem like you're more human to people, because that's really, if you base human emotion, benevolence and compassion is something that it's from birth, right? A mother and a father nurture from birth. Like, those things are just inherently there as being human. And so I don't know why we lose that when we put on a suit and tie, or we put a dress suit on, or whatever whatever we're wearing to work. I think we're human. Why we're masking it almost in a sense. Does that make sense?
And I think this goes directly with the podcast that we did last week, where you can still have that compassion, that empathy, that benevolence. I think where that tough side comes in is we have to still, as leaders, be able to make decisions, and we still need to have confidence in those decisions, and our employees need to have confidence in us in making those. And we can be compassionate and decisive at the same time, right?
you read the same article? Because later on it talks about being wisdom, right? So which is leadership competence, and it really talks about the fact that it's a balance, right? It's a balance of saying, it's a balance on both sides. One, to understanding, I know you're making a business decision. I realize that, and I know that you as a leader, right, from a subordinate standpoint, I know you have to do that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
And then at the same time saying, hold on, I'm a leader. I understand that my decision that I have to make is going to impact you. What can I do, or what can we do to minimize the impact if it's something, whatever, or if there's a change? You and I have talked about change fatigue all the time, where we, or we've talked about change before, where that can happen. And so I think just look, if honesty, consistency, and transparency, right? I mean, if you can master honesty and transparency, those are two things I think you can do all the time. Your message can come consistent all the time. And I think compassion just comes out of that, right? You don't even have to. So the article I read talked about you can actively work on compassion. And I think you can, right? If it's getting out, seeing people, really getting into what they care about and understanding your people, right? I had a good one the other day. They were talking about open door policies.
Yeah.
And how we really don't have open door policies. As leaders, we have these false sense of saying, yes, my door is always open. But the truth is that, like, if you don't go out and you don't walk the halls of a high school, walk the deck plates of your squadron, go to your businesses and see really what your people are doing, and just have conversations, that I think it's benevolent. It's an act of compassion. It's an act of kindness that, dude, they're real. Like, they really do care, which is what you're trying to show your genuineness, right? When you're a leader.
That's consistent act of going out is so important, because as leaders, a lot of employees see you as, oh, they're here to yell at us, or they're here to pinpoint what we're doing wrong, or, oh boy, here comes so-and-so. But if you're out there all the time and you ultimately show that you care and you're asking questions and you want to see the positive that's happening within the organization, that dialogue and that thought is going to shift, and they're going to appreciate you more, for sure.
Yeah, I fully agree, because at the end of the day, there's two sides to everything, right? There's a business side of a business, right? Or whatever you're doing. There's a mission to meet. There's a, whatever you want to say, a goal that everybody's trying to strive to, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, it's people carrying these things out. So there's a human side to all of it. I can remember a long time ago, at like one of the first leadership schools I ever went to, you get and you probably experienced this as a junior soldier, and I did as a junior sailor. When you made a certain rank, it was like, okay, now we're going to send you this first line leadership where you may be in charge of 3 people. And you guys may be in charge of mopping and taking the guard job, but you're in charge of it. So we need to talk. And really, I can look back at that and still remember a major point that someone said, and they said, look, the job's going to get done. Like it's going to get done. Right. And I stress to leaders all the time about not having single points of failure, having a backup to something where it's like, whatever. And if you're really focused on, and I know you talk about me to we and creating teams.
Yeah.
If focused on that, look, it's not like somebody's going to get mad that something happened in your life. They can take it over. And now all of a sudden, this benevolent act of like, hey, thank you for doing what you did. And it's just ingrained in your system as a business to say, this is how we're going to operate. Right. And there's goods and bads to having this family atmosphere at work. But if you think about it, we're connected more than ever to other human beings ever before. Why would we kind of block it off the actual feeling side of it,
Yeah. Wow. Good point.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm gonna pinpoint another article in September 2021. Forbes came out with an article that said empathy is the number one quality of leaders. And I'm going to ask you this, Flip. So,
oh boy, here we go.
There's a sense of empathy, right? And sure. that is being able to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes or see it in their perspective. But I think that compassion is like the next level up, because not only are you seeing it from their perspective, but now you're following up with compassion. You're asking them, hey, is your husband still okay? Or is your kid still okay? And you're showing this sense of endearment and caring that goes beyond that original sentiment of empathy. So I'm thinking, something's going on with you, Flip. You come into my office, you talk to me, I show empathy, I care about you. But then that compassion is what happens thereafter.
Yeah, I would. So I don't want to say next level up. I would say it's the follow on to it, right? When we talk about consistency is just saying what's wrong with you, right? And being empathetic and finding a problem. And I'm saying it very crude, but okay, what's going on? Got it. Okay, now what do we do? Right.
Yeah.
And then it's what you're talking about. And I think it's the thing is, what's the next step? How far would someone go to make sure that you're getting what you need to do? Right. And so I think I don't want to say next level up because I don't necessarily know. First of all, I think it's very hard sometimes for people to understand, to put themselves into other people's shoes. That is not an easy thing to do. You get blinded by what you have to do on your own. And frankly, we at some points we can't, right? So think about it this way, right? I could never understand what it would be like to be a black man in America, right? Like, and I can empathize and say, man, that I have a cousin on my adopted side or my biological side. And I asked him one day, I said, what, we were talking about this issue when George Floyd was coming up. And I said, what? He said something that was probably the most impactful thing I've ever said. He said, listen, he said, we both have sons. They're both young. He said, when you teach your son to drive a car, are you gonna make sure that you tell him that if he ever gets pulled over, he needs to like that is a real situation for himself of being in real trouble for no other reason, right? He was like, that potentially is a life and death situation. He goes, I feel the need that I have to talk to him about it like that. And it took me back from the whole story and went, whoa, like I can't empathize with that. I can't empathize with a woman who, right, because I don't have a uterus and I don't have, right, I can't empathize with or I can empathize, excuse me, but I can't put myself necessarily ever fully in the shoes of having to go through potentially an abortion or having the choice to, right? So when you look at it like that, that is when you're talking about it, your scale, that is the hard part to get over. I think that the next part, though, is to show that it is truthful and that it's real is what you're talking about, which is now it's the follow-up. What's the follow-up to it? Are you going to keep doing it all the time and making sure that it happens, right? And make sure that it's real. How many times have you heard from somebody like that you saw and had like a social media post about your birthday and then posting there, vice someone who texts you and saying, man, this person really did take the time. Like it wasn't just a post on the thing saying, saw my, right? Like it's kind of one of those, like you took the time to do something for me above and beyond. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I fully agree with you in that. I just wouldn't say at the next level up. I would just say it's the continuation, right? It's the follow. I mean, it should come hand in hand. I mean, they pair together really, really well, right? If you think about it.
Going back to that empathy thing, there is a person in my family who I always said did not have the skill of empathy growing up. And it's true. Like I never, ever felt like this individual even remotely understood what I was going through or tried to understand. And that went for a lot of other people in this person's life too. They've gotten a lot better, but I think it's a real thing that people need to work on, or take the time to do.
We battle in today's society about taking care of yourself versus taking care of everyone else. And we have told leaders time and time again, and I still do, right? How do you water the flowers in the watering can if there's not a hose, filling the watering can?
Yeah.
Right. Like it's a balance for leaders to have to make sure that they are taking care of themselves to take care of their people. We say that all the time, but we also expect though that our leaders are going to go above and beyond for us in some ways to make sure that it happens. I had a guest on, and a good friend of mine, Amanda, who is now the CEO of Avariero, and we were working together at another company, and we had a really, I mean, the best way to put it is an asshole client, and was very sexist and very whatever. It was second nature to me just to defend it, right? Of being like, what? And she wrote a great LinkedIn thing for me, and just as one of those recommendations or whatever, those references, those kind of references it has. And I didn't ask her necessarily to write what she wrote at all. But she said something very personal. She's like, I've never seen a man go to bat like that. No questions asked. No, don't ask me to self-sacrifice for the team type of stuff. It was one of those. And I'm not tooting my own horn. When it becomes natural to care, and that's just part of you, right? I think you can go from potentially working on being like that to just it becoming a very natural thing, right? And to your point about your family member, if you've never seen it, or you've never had it, or you've never needed to use it, it's not a skill. I would argue maybe it's not a skill. Compassion may be a skill, but being right, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, it's just understanding, right? And being empathetic is not,
He did through life without it, and did really well.
Yeah.
And now needs it.
And because remember, for you and I, it's and people who are parents, we always say what we've been in your shoes. So right? Like, so it's not like they're experiencing anything we didn't do, even though when you're young, you think that your parents, well, it's totally different now than it was before.
They could never understand.
It's not like, I know my parents went through stuff that I went through, all the same crap, but so yeah.
I have another point about benevolence I want to make.
Yeah.
So going back to that story, of like me spending a lot of time and energy and mental capacity preparing and then reflecting. So if we truly have a benevolent workplace, your employees should not spend that capacity in that world of worrying about what they said or what they did. And as a benevolent leader, you can model that behavior by, you come to a meeting, you might misstep, apologize, and then everybody just lets it go, because we are human, and everybody knows, like, it's okay, dude. We know you had good intentions behind that, right? So I just want to point that out, that like when we can get rid of that mental energy towards reflecting or preparing for meetings or preparing for these conversations, that can be way more productive workplace and a way more positive workplace, right? And then the other thing I want to talk about is, when we do have employees that do something wrong, or when we do wrong ourselves, I want to know how much time is spent, not necessarily yelling, but maybe disciplining our staff members or our employees based on that negative behavior. And
versus what?
So let's say there's an example of somebody who like just dropped the ball on a project, or not a minor project, or like just didn't get back to a customer fast enough or something. And they just literally lost sight of it for no other reason besides it got to the bottom of their inbox, or that sheet of paper that you put on their desk got buried. Instead of disciplining them, do you think that they're beating themselves up enough where they're feeling that guilt so that we don't have to, as leaders, add insult to injury? So
here's the thing you run into, right? If you don't recognize it, if you don't address it, and you're not saying don't address it, right?
Absolutely. I'm not saying don't address it.
I think it's so this is, Dale and I have gotten into this before, right? About how do you handle, I think it's, okay, let me put it to you this way. Young employees, when they read rule books, and I'll use the example of the military when I was young. I thought everybody got treated the same. And so if somebody did something, if somebody was late and somebody else was late, they should get treated exactly the same. And there's a case to say that may be the honest to God truth. And people have HR rule books that say this is how this should be handled and not be handled.
Right.
The problem is, though, is that when you get up to the leadership role, what you end up finding out is that none of those stories are usually ever the same, right? And I'm using a very just you're late, I'm late example. But if it's the 17th time this person is late versus the first time, just with nothing else on the plate, okay, hold on. There's a difference of how we handle those two things, right?
Absolutely.
If we have someone who we know, if we know our people, now let's just take one time late, and I don't necessarily know that anybody's getting hammered for one time late, but this is our scenario that we're playing with. I think to be a good leader, if you look at the because remember, on the outside, you're making a decision and there's people going to be judging your decision, right? Everybody else who's down there, as your subordinates, are going to say they're making this decision. That was a major thing for when a new CO took and needed to set the standard. And the first time something happened, that was something that was said. It wasn't necessarily why we did something, but it was, hey, just remember, we're setting a precedence when we do this with what we're doing, right? Whatever that was going to be. So and you remember this, and for our civilian folks, you could take pay, a commanding officer could dock your pay for half a month. They could, put you on extra duty for X amount of days. There was stuff that they could do to you to influence your behavior and discipline for the infraction of whatever that was. So, but it was a standard setting. So, right. So there's all these things into play. One, people don't know what the real thing is behind. So if you are compassionate, if you are being honest and consistent and transparent, you'll look at that person. You'll say, what's the reason behind all this, behind the problem? Maybe the problem is they can't afford daycare and they can't afford any daycare around them. And now they have to go further than they ever had before, right? To put daycare in it. And now you're like, wait a minute. Okay, what can we do what can we do as a leader to fix that? Because that, to me, again, excuses, I don't necessarily love the whole, people have reasons for doing the things that they do, and most people aren't doing things right, especially if they're good employees, right? Now, if you got a
benevolent.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because you're thinking about and you're taking that all on, right, and doing it. And those are leadership. When the Harvard Business Review talked about it and saying, you have to find the wisdom behind the reasons why you're doing stuff, right? You have to be able to do that. And so I think, to your point about, are you piling on stuff? Well, one, it has to be addressed, and everybody needs to know it needs to be that way. But if your culture is such that you understand and you're not coming across like this person is just doing this to get, I don't know, to get their kicks, to feel like a power play, that's not right. That's a very different way. And that is a negative impact on the employee to bring it up again. But if you're truly like, hey, how can I help you fix that? Right. My current boss says that all the time. He says that every single Monday and every single Friday. What can I do to help you this week to help you do your job? Right. And it's a small company still. So it's going to be like that. We'll get to the spot, we'll build where it's not going to be where he's not going to have that influence. Now he's handing those, that phrase should be handed down to his first line leaders, right? Of saying, how do we help you do that? Right. So I think if you take that mindset, it doesn't become negative. Now there's definitely times where you don't have to be an asshole, but you got it. Like, here's the rules, right? Gene probably needed not an asshole talk, but hey, this is exactly that's unacceptable. And I'm not, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm doing. And this is not acceptable.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a detriment when you come off like that. I think it's needed. And look, people know when they're being, people know, right?
Yeah. And I can think of direct situations where I've had to speak to employees like right away based on their behavior that they were exhibiting.
Yeah.
It was completely anti the authority within the system, right?
Yeah.
And so we can't have that. And
we've all said stuff where it's been like, oh shit, I shouldn't have said that, right? And I would directly go, maybe not everybody has it. I'm guessing they do, but you may not know about that. You may have said something and how it affected someone else, right? But if you find out that that's the case, then you, as a person, whether leadership aside, just let's talk about workplace and saying, look, I owe it to you then as an apology to say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to come across like that. It wasn't my intention. You know, you may have gone too far with it. That's not, you know, that's not crossing legal or assault lines, but just you can cross lines without being, you know, without necessarily doing something, you know, felony driven or police, right? You could just, it happens all the time. I think it, you know, and listen, how many times have we seen now where people are getting offended at very easy things that you would be like, that's not what did you talk to me all the time about it? You're like, look, I have this, I forgot your rule, but you have that rule of like, what is it? It's basically, this is how we are. And don't get, what's your don't get mad at it thing? Remember you told me that one time, you're like, listen, this is how it is. Don't get mad at it. No, people are going to make the mistakes and just move on from it. You know, apologize when you need to. You told me one time. Maybe I think this was you.
Sorry.
Maybe it
was. Maybe it was your other Laura friend.
Oh, maybe. Yeah. There you go. That sounded. Yeah. But so then I have a friend somewhere, my imaginary friend in my mind, who their take on it was, workplace things are going to happen. You can either get offended with it, or just know, hey, if it's an offensive thing, just say to somebody it's the way it is, and make your apologies and know that it wasn't intended to be.
That's benevolence.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe this was you, but you said it differently than when I heard you before.
If we always try to speak with good intentions and we misstep, just point it out and then know that it's wrong and apologize if you feel like that's necessary, and everybody's good, right?
So it was my real friend, Laura. Okay, good.
Maybe it was your real friend. Well, here's the thing. I live currently in central Wisconsin, and there are some pretty sheltered individuals in this town.
It's the hotbed.
And there are some not sheltered people in this town. Anyways, people will say some things that are not politically correct and have not been politically correct for a very long time. Very true. But they have never had that addressed to them. They don't even know that it's probably not okay to say. And when I was principal, some of my students even would say a word. I'm like, you know, that's not the correct term for that anymore. That's not how we say that anymore. Right. You know, and so that's okay. We just forgive them and we teach them. It's all about that education, and so that they can better understand or empathize with why we don't say that anymore.
A 15-year-old girl and a 13-year-old girl, and their vocabulary at their levels right now, are using words that we did not, we use in very different ways back in the day. And we're finding that, and I used the word, what did I use the word? Oh, I used the word groom. Right. And when we didn't use it as grooming like a pedophile back in, like if you were being groomed for stardom, or you were being groomed for a certain position, and
higher society,
right, like you were getting set up for good things, and then all of a sudden it took on the pedophile was the people groom people to do horrible things. And then but that's all they know it as. So I remember using that word, and they were like, "Whoa, Dad, whoa." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, we're grooming you for being a high level goalkeeper." Blah blah blah. No, don't say that. Screw. And I'm like, "Holy crap!" Right? Or whatever. Or the word slay. Slay meant very different word back when in the 90s, when it was right versus today. And slay's like cool, like, man, I just slayed that, whatever. Like as in like I killed, did awesome. I'm like, holy crap, like that's not. So yeah, I love. Listen, there are definitely places where the words being said are on purposely being said that way.
But right, you can usually tell, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And it was because I remember back in the day saying, when you're a kid too, I think there's a very difference when you're a kid and you don't understand versus, and you just don't know, versus when you're older and you absolutely know that that's not, something that you should be even remotely having your vocabulary around or being able to say. Right. But I think to your point of being benevolent, if the goal is that everybody should strive to be, to listen, I don't think we're saying, I think it's it's unrealistic to say that every single person at a business or on a team needs to be this super engaged. I care about everybody, but accepting is fine, right? Or just right, like you don't. Everybody's got levels of comfort too that I think we need to do. You and and having known you for as long as I have now, we're very comfortable with just opening up and look, I'll go to the ends of the earth, excuse me, for you. And I mean it as a group of I'll help out anybody I can if I need to, and most of my intentions are not most, almost all my intentions are well placed. I'm all about, I use humor as much as anyone else. I'll make fun of everybody, including myself, because it's there, but I'm not. But if it ever got to that point, it would, hey, okay, I understand, right? Like we shouldn't. So it's a good point about the discipline side. I don't think you're doing harm if you're doing it from a place that you've been to, right? Like if you're starting, if you're starting,
then address it a little bit more strong. Like it's kind of this scale, and you're exactly right. Is we're all human, and I probably said it every podcast I've been on. There's so much gray with human. There's not black and white. I mean, when you were giving the example of being late, were you out partying till 2 a.m. the night before, or did your kid throw up right before you were walking out the door? Right? There's two very different types of being late, even if it is the first infraction or the 17th infraction.
And even that, right? Like it's your 40th birthday party, and it just and whatever, you planned it for a Sunday, or they gave you a surprise, and there's still even that where you're like, okay, I get, right, for people who, because it's a never cry wolf thing, right? Like it's the people who, Dale's talked about this before, where you're like, man, you just have these consistent people who are, look, some people just make bad decisions, and they've been making bad decisions because that's just their, I mean, it's just how it is, right? Like, and so how do you steer that, and how do you say, okay, right? Because as a business side leader, if you're not meeting mission because of it, then it's distracting the business. And now it has to be addressed in some formal way. If it's not, right, it still, I think, needs to be addressed, and saying, hey, before it gets out of hand, before it gets to someplace it doesn't need to. And I think that's being proactive, right? So to your point about saying you have someone and then you do the follow-up afterwards, right? I think there's also a proactivity to it, where if you see something where it's not like we're talking, right, you can proactively say, hey, before this gets whatever, right? I used to do that all the time, where I did it the most as a soccer coach that I can remember. My best example, where a mother or a father would say something to me, and I would address it as a whole on the team, not as direct, and I would never call out a family or a player, but I would just say, hey, so the next practice I would say, hey, we understand. Like, so if I had one instance where we had one of our strongest players was picking on, in some way, shape, or form, one of our weakest players. And it was, the mom brought it to my attention, and I said, hey, you have the way I thought to handle it was two ways. One, go mom to mom, right? Go parent to parent. You owe that you're a parent. You should be able to do that. Go parent to parent. You told me, I'll make sure that I address the team as a whole to say, hey, this is unacceptable. We don't act that way as a team. Everybody has a role, whatever that role is, right? And I think that's, again, you're not calling out the issue. You're not also calling out the other person to make them feel like, especially with kids, right? It's like, oh my God, I don't want to be called out as getting picked on. So I think there's ways and creative ways that leaders can also show compassion and work on problems directly, but in indirect ways, right? Like you can make sure, because listen, who knows? And here's a great point to what you were saying. You chances are, if one person is bringing you the problem, chances are it's not the only problem going around, right?
Yeah.
So to be able to address it as a group, to say, hey, we don't act that way. This is not, or this is happening. Now, you don't want to bombard everybody all the time. You don't want to bring everybody into the thing. But at the same time, there's ways to kind of address it and saying, hey, had some instances. This is just, just want to make sure that everybody understands the policy and what we're really doing. And then you don't have to directly necessarily, especially when it doesn't require what you talked about. If you think it's going to make it worse, then there's other ways I think you can look around it while showing, because that's really kind of compassion for the best word is perpetrator, right? For the incident maker, right? Is saying, okay, you don't want to make it worse. That's showing your compassion. It's showing benevolence in some way.
Clearing expectations for everybody.
Yeah, right. Because if you called them out, what would happen, right? You'd probably end up with, it would be worse. So,
right.
I mean,
And I think about the two adages of like what you permit, you promote, and what you accept, you teach. So if somebody sees this happening and they think you don't address it, then they're like, oh, they don't care if this happens. So if you address it to the greater good, they're all going to know where you stand on that issue, right?
Yeah, that's a tough one because sometimes you just can't address them when you're, and as well, you've been in leadership positions where you're like, it needs to stay. It's always the difference. I know it.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying in your
tough
situation that
saying,
like as much as you can with the greater good. Dang, there was something that you were talking about that I wanted to address too, but it's gone. It might come back to me, but yeah. Well, this wasn't what I was going to say, but I remember when I would get feedback from the staff, and there's always some really good constructive criticism in feedback, and sometimes it hurts, and that's just us being human, right? But what I would do with that feedback is if, let's say, communication suffered in this instance or something like that, I would come to the staff and be like, here's my goals based on your feedback. I heard that you said that communication was not great in this situation, and here's how I'm going to improve the situation. So I would say this to the whole staff. I didn't know who gave me that feedback, but now the whole staff knows I've heard the feedback and I'm going to do something about it. Right. So that was my way as a leader to make sure that they really did feel heard and like, I value what they have to say.
Yeah. I guess that's a great point about you're talking about the subject matter, not specific situation matter, and saying, hey, just so you know, this has come up and it's being addressed. I can assure everybody that it's being addressed. Yeah, that's a great point of how to handle that, because you're right. I think it's there's always that thing, right? Like executive privilege, like what do you know and what other from, like, I get it, right? And I always used to tell people, especially like when they made E7, and I've talked about this before, that's the big leadership jump in the Navy to be a chief, is that you're seeing a different side of everything. And leadership, let's take you being like an executive advisor to like a CEO or a command master chief. You got to see behind the curtain, and what was back there wasn't always the most glamorous part of it, but you for sure, when you walked out on the stage, it was, you were all put together and made sure that you were one unit and one voice. And so I think that was one of the things you said it, right? Navy used to say, and still does, we're haze gray and underway, right? The color of our ships was haze gray. And I used to tell people, look, you need to learn. Leadership is about learning to operate in the gray, right? It's not. It's because everybody has black and white. Like, hey, our policy says this, and somebody's going to walk up to you and go, hey, our policy says this. But the truth of the matter is, and this, it's better that we make decisions within the gray and not necessarily within the black and white, right? Because then we can we can use compassion and use benevolence to make our decisions, right, for things. And then you take someone who's late versus someone who's late, and you say, they're very different situations that you're looking at. And if I operate on black and white only, you may lose a good person, and you may do something that you may have to do something that is not worth doing at that point, right? And so I love the ability for a leader to operate in the gray and to take things. And HR departments have to deal with it every day. Like, let's make the best decision here. What's the most logical, right? I mean, that's what it boils down to,
Yeah. And trying to hold everybody under the same umbrella just doesn't work.
Yeah. I on all levels, right? Like,
I'm giggling a little bit because I got out some yearbooks, and I don't ever do this. I think the last time I looked at my high school yearbook was like, 2000. I was quoted my freshman year. They were doing a 0 tolerance rule on, I think, tardiness. And I said, I said, I'm against this. I said, because this is creating a pipeline. Like if you start expelling them now, how is that going to help them? If you don't even try to help them to get to school on time, if you just say you're expelled or you're suspended or you're in after school suspension and you can't participate in sports and all of the school's fun is gone, why would they even want to come? And so like my whole quote was like, you're just creating this negative pipeline without actually trying to help them. And I think that's pretty amazing that 25 years or 4 years ago, whatever, I had the same mentality about this human grayness, without so many words, back then that I have right now.
Okay.
I just thought it's funny. I'm just adding a little crazy story that I just read this yearbook. I'm like, I agree with my freshman self.
Yeah, the point. It totally works, right? It works in the sense that, when you're, first of all, we probably had a lot more knowledge back then than we knew about, or we were a lot smarter because we were going off of very black and white things when we were back then, and we look back on it. And I, oddly enough, we didn't even talk about this before, but I had been reminiscing back of the yearbooky thing actually recently as well.
Oh my gosh.
I did. I had a bad religion quote for my senior quote.
You don't even want to know what I said.
I used there's no vestige of a beginning, there's no prospect of an end. When it all ends, it'll all happen again, or something like that. It was a song by Bad. I know, it was really like, and I had probably listened to Bad Religion twice, so I look back and I was like, why did I use that? Like that's just. Yeah. But anyway, some karma reincarnation thing. I know. Well, that's it, right? You look back on what we did, and it wasn't all that, but again, well-intentioned tardiness thing, or at least what they were trying to, but thinking about long-term and thinking about the other effects.
Yeah.
That's what you were thinking about. You were like, wait, that's not,
Why are you taking away everybody's, and then dean of students, same mentality. I mean, what can we do to keep these kids in school and enjoying school so they want to be here?
Right.
And they want to show up on time.
That's tougher. That's tougher with brains that aren't as developed or not, right? And they see the influencing as being, that's tough. I mean, listen, my dad was a 30-year teacher, right? Practicing benevolence was something that he had to do all the time. And I know, as the older he got and the more towards the end of his career, it was a lot less of, I'm not putting up with that crap types things than it was, I'm sure, before.
Like people should retire eventually.
That's right. And he did. I mean, it was changing. Like anybody who's in a career for a long time, you get changes. I was just talking to a good friend who hopefully I'm going to have on, have on in a couple of weeks. We'll do a recording with him. But we talked about how just in the last 3 years since I've been out, I got out in 19, and they've two of my best friends, Jason and Matt, very different places, both command master chiefs, and but they had to deal with COVID leadership through. Yeah. And I told them, I said, you changed so much. You've had to change so much in 3 years.
Yeah.
About things that, and what's crazy is that the more you get, you end up with, how do I put it? You end up being numb sometimes to being benevolent and to being compassionate, because you're like, the whole thing is it's just a lot to kind of weigh on, and you're like, listen, I just want it to be easier at times, because it's not like, we'll wrap this up quick, but being compassionate would seem to be very easy. But when you're struggling with, not struggling, but when you have expectations on you to meet goals, to meet the mission, to meet demands of, and you're getting tugged from lower and upper, especially mid-level, it's tough to do that, because you got to balance it all, right? I mean, it is a balance of it all.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was referring to earlier, when it was like the struggle of, what can I tell my staff, what can I not? And like, I wasn't the one directly making the decision, so even I didn't have all the answers, and And here's the thing that civilians may not grasp and that non-educators may not grasp is that the education system and the government move incredibly slowly, right? Like typically decisions take eons to implement with lots and lots of buy-in and all the stakeholders involved. And it's crazy. But when COVID hit, it was immediate decisions with institutions that were not meant to change that quickly. And
Yeah,
so
that's a good point. That's a really good point.
Yeah, the employees and the leaders were all probably at the same time like, what? And just did it with the best intentions. But again, like,
yeah, that's why a lot of them, like you remember, right? In 2020, most of them just like, I know the school system here just shut down.
yes.
They were like, you guys.
Well, we did at home learning. And then all of a sudden these teachers who didn't have internet or didn't have proper computers or whatever. And then we were expecting our families to also get stuff hooked up. So we were buying hotspots up the wazoo, but even those didn't, like, it was just really chaotic.
I remember we were in Maryland for the end of it. We didn't leave until June. We left in June.
Oh.
We left so we literally left June of 2020 from Maryland to Kansas. Kansas had been out of school already because they stopped in March and they just said, everybody's good.
No.
Yep. So if you were
graduating seniors?
Yeah, now. Yep, everybody. They were all good. Grades weren't because they couldn't remember like your place. We were
the Kansas educational system.
So Blue Valley school system is ranked as a top 50 district in the country.
All right.
So it's insanely it's really good.
Good.
But everybody gets MacBooks right? And that's not a thing of it. So in Maryland, we were on a, so our school was already using an online learning platform for our middle school. So they were able to just go start getting assignments over that thing, but it really wasn't, they even said, they're like, we can't really test. We can't do what we want to do. So just here's this filler stuff for the rest of the year type thing. Right. Kansas had just said, there's too many people and too many variables that we can't do this. So just and they didn't have any MacBooks and stuff to go around, at least to the rural section, to the rural places that were there. So they just said, you're done. Like my nephew was class of 2020 and he was done, I think in, like I said, maybe March, April. Yeah. I think April or May timeframe, and by the way, we're done at school May 23rd. So you were only missing about 30 days of school. It wasn't like it was a huge thing, but still, like, you're right. Like nobody knew what to do. And that's a great point. Like you wish from the bottom, you would think it's easy decisions, but it's not just the decision. Leaders can make a decision very quickly. It's implementing and processing it, or if it's got to go higher and get a final buy-in, like that's not an easy, doesn't take time. You wish it did. But,
you don't know the domino effect of certain decisions until
sure, absolutely,
later on, right? I mean, did Kansas release all these seniors who weren't really ready for the real world because they missed their last 2 months of school? I mean,
they're all. We're still feeling it. The college effects are feeling it, and everybody. Listen, I think everybody knew schools came back, right? And when they did, I think I had my younger daughter was in the hardest grade that got hit, I think is what they said. Cause she was going from 5th grade to 6th grade. And so that was from the elementary. I got one teacher to middle school, which was, I've got 4 to 5 teachers and now, right. And they were online. So now they're like, so it was because 2021 was all online. So, but well, listen, a
little bit there.
What's that?
I said we digressed a little bit.
Well, but it all fits in. How do you, when you talk about compassion, you talk like, it kind of all fits. Like to your students, there's a compassion piece to your students about what you do and how you do that too. But we get off on tangents. That's what the rant's all about. That's why it's called the rant, because you can talk about anything we want. So, listen. Final thoughts? Anything?
I just think benevolence is kind of an underused word that can make a huge impact in businesses. And if you use it explicitly and share the meaning behind it and make sure that your staff members, your employees know that that's the direction you want to take, then it can make huge impacts in moving forward in a positive way. And really increasing that productivity, again, if they're not fixated on reflecting on meetings or worried about what they said at that last interaction. Just have good intentions and do your best.
Yeah. Be human. Is that like how humans should be, I
Be
guess?
a good human. Be a
What we're
good
looking at? Yeah, be a good human. Exactly.
Mhm.
Well, as always, thank you very much to all of our listeners, both live and who's going to listen to this later. Thank you, Laura, for coming on. I know, by the way, to everybody, she's fitting in a new job and she's fitting this in still to keep this here. So thank you for staying with us.
I'm so happy to do it.
Yeah, well, it's always fun. So listen, the rest of this month, let me give you the schedule coming up. Next week, Dale and I will get on for the Lions Den. We'll bash it out and bring leadership things that are relevant in what's going on in the world and see how we'll handle them live. So he'll bring some stuff that I don't know about and everything else. Got a special guest, probably will be recorded, but got a good special guest, Jason Thibodeau, good friend of mine, led through COVID, led through a bunch of stuff, really is a fundamentalist about leadership. He's a big proponent of that. Looking forward to having him on a recorded one for the Thursday after that. And then Dale and I, we didn't bring it out, so we're bringing it out now. We're telling you, we are going to work on the four pieces of execution for our book review. So we're excited to bring that, to be able to do that. So the four things of execution. So that'll be at the end of the month. We'll review that book, which will be really good.
Cool.
But otherwise, yeah. Well, thank you for being on today. I appreciate your time. Thanks for everybody for listening today. Sorry about the little delay. It was totally. I forgot to hit the live button. If that makes it's hilarious. She said something totally cool before, and then I told her she had to do it all again. So if it came off nervous, she doesn't ever come off nervous. She comes off amazing every time. So great job.
Oh, you're sweet.
Absolutely. Listen, everybody have a great week. As always, flip out. Have a great week. So we'll see y'all. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.